The U.S. Supreme Court on Friday preserved the country's access to the widely used abortion pill mifepristone, blocking new restrictions set by lower courts. The move delivers a small victory to reproductive rights advocates, as well as to President Joe Biden's administration, as it defends broad access to the drug in the United States. In a 7-2 decision, the top court granted emergency requests by the Justice Department and the pill's maker to halt a preliminary injunction issued by a Texas district judge on April 7th and later amended by an appeals court. The injunction would have greatly limited the availability of mifepristone, while a lawsuit goes on over the pill's federal regulatory approval, brought by anti-abortion medical groups against the Food and Drug Administration. As the injunction battle goes back to the appeals court in mid-May, several separate legal fights are going on surrounding mifepristone.
There's a long war ahead.
Harvard Assistant Professor of Medicine Amit Saparari called it a complex litigation puzzle that could have serious implications on the integrity of the FDA.
If for some reason the court were to accept and uphold the decision as it was issued by the Texas court, that would really represent an unprecedented intrusion into FDA's approval and decision-making process. And if that were to happen, then I think you would see more judicial interference into the FDA approval process, and that would seriously threaten the integrity of the FDA.
In a statement, Biden said, quote, "As a result of the Supreme Court's stay, mifepristone remains available and approved for safe and effective use while we continue this fight in the courts," and added that he would continue to fight politically driven attacks on women's health.
My reaction is that advocates for reproductive health and a strong FDA want to battle with this ruling, but that there's a long war ahead. I think importantly, in a 7-2 decision, the Supreme Court chose to stay the Texas court ruling. Now, the implications of that are that mifepristone, a medication abortion drug, will remain available. That is very important in ensuring reproductive health. I think the pharmaceutical industry will take this as a positive sign. I think it's going to collectively breathe a sigh of relief. I think they largely stayed off the playing field during the Texas decision, but once that was issued, I think they realized that the ramifications of this ruling would be very broad for the industry and really threaten the stability of the pharmaceutical market. I'd like to think that FDA approval is safe, and I think the fact that you had a stay here with a 7-2 vote shows me that the Supreme Court understands the gravity of this case and its implications for the larger pharmaceutical industry. I think that it remains to be seen how the Supreme Court will rule and whether or not it can cabin this issue specifically to abortion. I think it's clear, though, that if for some reason the court were to accept and uphold the decision as it was issued by the Texas court, that would really represent an unprecedented intrusion into FDA's approval and decision-making process. And if that were to happen, then I think you would see more judicial interference into the FDA approval process, and that would seriously threaten the integrity of the FDA and I think trust in the FDA. So this is one piece in a very complex litigation puzzle that is incredibly hard for even FDA experts to keep track of. So there is this case, which will now be sent back to the Fifth Circuit. There is another case in Washington in which 17 states and the District of Columbia have have sued FDA to keep the current standards in place for accessing mifepristone. Now, that ruling is in conflict with the Texas ruling, so that's one complication. And then you have a few other things going on. You have the generic manufacturer of mifepristone, GenBioPro, recently filing suit in the District of Maryland, arguing that FDA will not protect their procedural due process rights because they haven't given any notification of what would happen were the Texas ruling to take effect. And then on the other side of things, there is a larger debate as to whether or not states' restrictions on abortion, and specifically medication abortion, are preempted by federal law. And so FDA is uh, given the task by Congress to bring safe and effective drugs to market. And once a drug is approved, to basically say that this drug cannot be accessed in a particular state seems to stand in tension with federal law. And so there is a challenge that is being brought in West Virginia, that West Virginia's law is unconstitutional because it's preempted by federal law, that they can't simply ban medication abortion. So all of those pieces are being played out right now, and it remains to be seen how those decisions will ultimately filter up. But there's no doubt that some sort of clarity is not going to happen until the Supreme Court issues a definitive ruling. I guess in one respect, this case eh, is fundamentally about expertise and the degree to which we trust uh, uh, scientific officials. And I think that this is an issue that the pandemic has brought to the forefront, not only in the US, but across the world. And the degree of deference that I think that is ultimately given the FDA in this instance is going to have long-term implications for the credibility that I think the public is going to the credibility of the FDA in the eyes of the public, and in the eyes of clinicians as well. Um, and so for that reason, again, I think that the stakes are very high.
One does not have to abandon their faith, right? Their faith or their deeply held beliefs to agree the government should not be telling that woman what to do with her body. This evokes, in my mind, very fundamental rights, including the right to freedom for each individual to make a decision about what is in their best interest, the best interest of their family. And if they choose, make that decision with their priest or their pastor or their rabbi. But the government should not be making this decision. On the mifepristone issue, it's politicians finding a court, targeting a specific court that they thought would be helpful to them, to take a medication off the market which was approved 20 years ago by the Federal Drug Administration. Yes. Think about that. I'd ask anybody to look in their medicine cabinet, and any drug that you have prescribed by a doctor to alleviate your pain or extend the quality of your life has been FDA approved. And arguably what they're doing with mifepristone could happen to any one of those drugs in your medicine cabinet.